This is the last of Utpaladeva's songs in his work, Shivastotravali. And so bringing this wonderful discussion of Shivastotravali to an end is something I'm not quite ready to embrace. No! And also very hopeful that in the last of the sutras, something, even deeper and more meaningful than the territory we've already crossed with it will come into play. But, we'll see. I bow to the Master, Lord of the three worlds, white with ashes, three-eyed, bearing the serpent as a sacred thread and the crescent moon as a crown, a diadem, crown. White with ashes is covered with the ash of dead bodies from the cremation ground and the cremation fire. This is what Shiva is clothed in. Otherwise, he is naked. This is both the iconography, but this is also the ideology. We are, our livingness is covered, is veiled by death. And the endless evaporation of everything that as humans we hold valuable, both in the metabolic process and most especially at the cremation fire. We are covered in that ash. And that's depressing to the part of us that is entangled, or I could say connected with, but it's also entangled in the world. That is depressing. The part of us that is entangled in the world. It's depressing to the part of us that is hopeful. And yet, to that part of us which is truly and really alive, the part of us that is motivating, that is powering the physiological processes that bring this body-mind complex into existence in the first place and sustain it in the second, those processes which also devour it at the end. This evaporation is a dance that is relentlessly a joyful occasion. It is joyful. It is not a termination of anything, but a relentless recreation of everything, of all the three worlds, through the respiratory process that is fundamental to the livingness of pure being, and that's Shiva. Pure being is Shiva. The serpent as a sacred thread. The serpent is all of the human processes driven by human pathology. Maybe the thought is also the word impurities. The serpent, all the poison that is kind of the essence of our interaction with most of humanity. The jealousy, the greed, the anger, even desire, ambition. Shiva wears all of that as a sacred thread. It's just an ornament on his, ornamental part of his being. Sacred because of its humanness. And the crescent moon as his diadem, his recognition of his place, his livingness in all of the universe, his livingness even beyond the earth. While we arise as a function of the livingness of the earth, and we are never any different than the livingness of the earth, which is personally why I think the whole idea of space travel is folly. I think, somebody may get out there in space or even get to another planet eventually, but I think what they're going to say is, oh shit, what have we done? Which is probably the same thing at some point the public health institutions in the United States, in the world, on earth, are going to say about mRNA vaccines. I think at some point, not in our lifetime, or maybe at the end of my lifetime, they're going to say, holy fucking shit, what have we done? Shiva recognizes, his livingness, which is transcendent even of the earth, in all of its modes and all of its ups and downs, life on earth. Shiva is motion in space. Homage to the one wearing as raiment his own illustrious halo of radiant beams. His own inner light is his garment, his luxurious garment. Bedecked with glittering garlands of skulls for the festival of dance at the end of the world. The Tandava. The Tandava is Shiva's dance, which mythologically, this is part of the mythology of Shiva. At the end of the world, Shiva does a dance, the Tandava, that is an ecstatic dance. He goes into a trance. And this is an interesting question that the mythology raises, because at the only other time I'm aware of that Shiva starts to do the Tandava is in a moment of intense grief when his consort, Parvati, is killed by demons. Shiva starts to do the Tandava, but is constrained from it by Vishnu. And so if it's out of grief that he enters into this super ecstatic destruction, or out of some other reason, it's mysterious. Something to contemplate. It's something that most of the people who read the mythology are never going to contemplate, but something to think about. How do we get there? Do we actually get to a happy ending? Or is it finally at the end of the day that, the grief of being alive just is too much to take and we disappear? Reminds me of Macbeth. To be or not to be. Is all fortune outrageous fortune? Certainly reading Shakespeare, we might come to that conclusion. Be decked with glittering garlands of skulls. This body is just completely a temporary thing. Let's get used to it. For a festival of dance at the end of the world, which is, of course, twofold meaning, and one is the end of the world being the end of our world as we transition out of it, and also a cosmic end of the world, a recognition that everything, including, our cosmic world, comes to an end. Everything comes to an end. And only awareness itself, sentience, if you want to call it that, endures beyond creation and destruction. Sentience itself endures, and from sentience, endless new, I shouldn't say new, I don't know new, but I can say endless renewal of cognitive capacity endures. I think that's what it looks like, both certainly from the mythological perspective. This is something that we have been told for, longer than we're aware of, longer than we've able to track our own history. And it's something that somehow we intuitively experience, we feel as well, whenever any of us have had a deep intuitive experience. Deep intuitive experience is not something that is available to most human beings, amazingly. They just don't go there, right? They can't hold a connection to their own hearts and minds long enough that any deep intuitive experience will emerge. And in a way, that is because living life is so painful that most people are just trying to put it out, to stop the pain. And so rather than accepting the pain and looking into it deeply and having an intuitive experience, most people are just busy running away. And some people use spirituality and a kind of religious mania which drives them, which is really driven by the pain they're in and is an effort to avoid it. Well, that is the wrong use of a tool if I've ever seen it, but, that's what people do. Our spirituality, both in a physical sense, asana practice, and meditation, and our reading of these texts, our study of any text, is intended to make our pain more bearable, that we can steady the turbulence that pain creates in our minds, so that our hearts and minds can come together in an effulgence, in an upwelling of intuitive experience which will facilitate, our peace. I bow to the eternally sacred abodes, whose deity is Hara, another name for Shiva, whose activities are worthy of Hara, and whose very breath of life is dedicated only to Hara. This is one of the few references that I've seen in even in non-dual Shaivism to the connection with the notion of the breath of life and the goddess, because it is Parvati or Uma, or her many names, and she has many names. The goddess has many names. There's only one goddess really, but she has many names. She has many different modes and moods. That's what all the different goddesses are about, but she's forever only one, and whose very breath of life is dedicated only to Hara. Respiratory process and the goddess, breath of life, respiratory process, the goddess, is one with Shiva and is based in devotion. Devotion, which, dedicated is an interesting word, because dedicated and committed might be the same. And committed is a choice. It kind of calls into my mind a discussion of love, which we talk about, everything is love, and love, love, love. I love you. And I would say one thing about love. It is a feeling. There is a feeling. It is a quality of connection. It refers to the endless abundance of the ultimate reality. But love is also a choice. When we love somebody, we have chosen to love them. We haven't inadvertently loved them, and that's because all of our connections with each other are lumpy enough that if without that choice, we just fucking wouldn't do it. So love is a choice. And as time passes, that choice becomes ever more important. And the reason it becomes important is because in the process of living and dying, what we hope for is an ever more expansive renewal of that dimension of us which is truly living. We want more range of motion for our vital energy. We want more range of motion for the prana in our body and for the cognitive processes that that encompass our body. And ultimately, we want more range of motion for the vibrancy of our soul. So, this range of motion is a choice that we make. And it's a choice as we age that we make that becomes ever more central to our existence. And I, say to myself, to the degree that I can, I have to choose those values again and again and again and again and again, and to the extent that I am able, as long as I have strength in my body and clarity in my mind, I want to choose love. I want to choose, growing. I want to choose, all of the very extremely fine values which I have sought to cultivate in myself and encouraged the cultivation of in all of you and in everybody I've ever met. It is important to our process as spiritual people, and at least those of us here who are here have demonstrated our value for and commitment to those processes. It is important for us in this process to make choices that sustain those values. And we have to choose. And as we age, the choice will become more challenging because, the pain of it all is ever more stark. So, the choice that we have becomes even more important. And as, our vitality wanes, we will be tempted to choose something else or not to choose at all. And we must not. We have to stay strong in our choice. That's what I think he's saying here. I think he's saying the breath of life is dedicated only to pure awareness. And that dedication is a choice. I always looked upon everybody as an expression of God. Everybody has God in them. But I also felt like, and I still feel like, the poor people, there are many, many, many more poor people than there are rich people in the world. And poor people is where all the biggest potential lies. Poor people is the waste in our world. The creative capacity of poor people is just poured down the drain by the rich. Because they don't want a better world. They just want more for themselves, as George Carlin has pointed out. So I accepted everybody, thinking that, the thing that most people need, the thing that I recognized that I needed and that I fortunately received, was a choice. And I couldn't make people do what was good for them. I couldn't, force, and I wouldn't force people to engage in what I'm doing over the long pole. But I wanted to at least give them a choice and to appreciate that they had a choice, that they could go forward from a choice with some, conviction that they could recreate their lives in a way that might suit them. Another thing was that I tried to be completely transparent. I didn't go out of my way to be transparent, but I didn't put any boundaries up to transparency, and I have not been afraid to acknowledge my behavior. But it is because I have believed and still believe that my experience with Rudy, the level of closeness that I had with Rudy, was a profound blessing for me because it allowed me to accept myself. Sitting with Rudy while he cried over a choice that somebody else made that had hurt him very much, broke my heart on the one hand, but it made it okay for me to cry too. I could cry. And I didn't have to feel bad about it. Well, okay, a little embarrassed about crying, but still it was okay. And I have always believed that being available for people in my own humanity was a benefit to them, a great blessing that was worth the cost of it to me. Now, I don't know. I'm not so much, Because, in the world, what people do is they see the humanity of other people and they weaponize it. It's like sexuality for me. Sexuality is something I have always been, I'm sex positive, I suppose is one way I would say it. And I have always felt strong and still feel strongly that one of the most powerful and found, essential parts of a human being is their sexuality. It is so powerful. And acceptance of that sexuality and its unfoldment, it gives each of us some confidence and some access to joy and some experience of energy and so on and so forth. It's all positive. Suppression of it is mostly negative. And what exists in the middle between the all positive parts and suppression is messy, which is why people can't deal with it. But I've always been sex positive, and I've always felt that a society that was sex positive and a culture that dealt with the messiness in a constructive way would be a profound improvement on the culture that we live in today. Challenging, maybe, but so what the fuck? We send, people to the earth, we send people to the moon, and we build weapons that are, science fiction-y, and we can do all kinds of shit. We build telescopes that hang out beyond in between the sun and the moon. We could do it if we wanted. But as human beings, we would much rather, and our leadership encourages us to spend money on weapons and technology that we don't need. When our roads and our bridges and our dams and our electrical grids are dissolving, and our healthcare is shit. I've always felt that, that our cultivating and unfolding our sexuality was a pathway to better human beings and a better culture. As we move in this world, over and over and over again, we have to think about deeply what our real values are and stand in those real values, irrespective of how the world relates to them. Because for the most part, it's all about corruption. And God bless them. That's what they get to do. Everybody gets to paint their own canvas. But just because somebody else is painting their canvas with cow shit doesn't mean you have to do it. Beyond your lordship is yet another one of your amusements. That is, by sheer will, I find spontaneous means to your glorious acts. That's a complicated piece of work, but I think that what he is referring to is the amusement of intuitive experience and the endless novelty of its expression. And so rather than in the term lordship, there is an implication of control. And there's an implication of structure that can and should be controlled. Right? This is the law, the rule. And beyond that is the amusement and the delight that by sheer force of our own will we can discover, which is the spontaneous explosion of intuitive experience that leads to a whole renewal of the landscape of our creative life. Landscape of our life, which is creative, and landscape of our creative life. It's interesting to me that Utpaladeva would say this because, his writing of the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karikas is very authoritative. It is very highly structured. It is intensely disciplined. It is, powerful, but also very royal statement of formality. And here he is acknowledging and referring to as something extraordinarily high, the spontaneous, creative, unstructured, intuitive experience which is relentlessly, profoundly transformative. When the whole universe honors just this much of your splendor, the mere play in the world, how infinite indeed must be your bliss. Ta-da! Let's choose, and in our choice, let us be infinitely blissful. How can one not be beatified who is loved by Gauri's hara? Someone who is immersed in the experience of the breath of life, in all of the completely wondrous ways in which it expresses itself. How can one, with that experience, not be completely beautified, completely beautiful, and in that beauty filled with bliss? How can Hara not be supremely the supreme beloved of Gauri? Beloved is a choice, and devotion is a choice. It is a choice. It is a choice that constrains the pathways of our mind for the sake of self-cultivation and the revelation of our own personal ultimate reality. The inability to constrain our minds from going down all the rabbit holes which appear in our lives as we age, so many experiences that we accumulate that we could feel bad about, frankly. Not going down that rabbit hole, but choosing to constrain our minds, to attend to and choose dedication and devotion, choosing love, is what allows for the expansion of our own, soul into merging with the universe. That in itself, as we leave this body, and that in itself is the definition of liberation. Just as the roots of that sacred tree lie in the sublime and everlasting recognition, so too are formed its branches of sense perception. The roots of the sacred tree lie in sublime and everlasting recognition. And that recognition is the recognition of the non-duality of everything. It is, in its crudest form, the continual remembrance that nothing that we see or feel is actually real. That's a little disconcerting. It's like we know that the chair that I'm sitting in is 99.9% space. This chair that's holding me up is space. This body is mostly space. And the only thing that holds it together is, if particles are real, and we don't know that particles are real. We don't know that. But if particles are real, then the only thing that holds this chair together is an electromagnetic bond that joins the particles together that comprise this chair that is made in space. But it's also equally likely that somehow an expectation is what binds together whatever it is that is bound together underneath me to support my body in space. It's very bizarre. And yet extremely possible. It's extremely possible that what I see of myself when I look in the mirror doesn't exist at all. I may actually in reality look like I just stepped out of a Jell-O mold. I don't know. And maybe that's extreme, maybe not. I don't know. That's where we started this whole poem reading, 20 weeks ago or 21 weeks ago. I was saying we don't know. But there is some sentience that we can attest to, that we share, that, is sustained by flow. And the recognition of that sentience and our appreciation of it is the very foundation of our capacity to encompass blissfully all of the extraordinary uncertainty that we must exist with. The uncertainty is astonishing. I think of all the uncertainty I have transitioned through from Connorsville High School to here, and I think, holy fucking shit, how did I live? How did I not die? So we must recognize and appreciate the sentience which is cosmic in scope, that is our fundamental, most basic nature. And every day as we experience anything, we bring our attention again and again and again and again and again to that sentience and its extraordinary, capacity for renewal, which resides in the breath of life that is our ground. Sentience and breath is our ground. That recognition is our root that allows us to appreciate our sense perceptions in a new way as the living expression of that living sentience, which is our essence. And then in that case, sense perception is not something to be suppressed, as in Advaita Vedanta and different traditions in Buddhism, and also in, the Yoga Sutras, the whole discussion of dharana as a withdrawal of the senses and generally a a subtle condemnation of engagement and sense perception is one of the things that is, I mean, even in Christian mysticism, this is also present. You know, there is this subtle suggestion that because sense perception is illusionary, that it is impure. And these guys, you know, in their attempt to find peace with the reality of our experience, not some, this is idealism which is practical. This is an idealism which is idealistic. You know, acknowledging and attempting to encompass in our understanding of ourselves, our own sense perception. We do not deny anything, but rather we appreciate sense perception as the spontaneous, you know, and blissful creative expression of, you know, our own ultimate reality. And then we can wake up and smell the coffee and say, bravo. This is an awakening that is truly awake, not an awakening which is attached to being asleep because it's easier. Sleep is nice. Awake is just fucking painful. When the itch for devotion flares up, worship comes into being as a great pillar of smearing stone. The great pillar of smearing stone. Now this is cool because remember that I talked about, and I know I talked about with it, the tantric Buddhist vihars, the Vajrayana vihars in Kathmandu, and the agam houses, which are the Shaiva tantric centers of devotion, exist. And each of these communities have a stone that in the old days their spirit power resided on. You know, of course, we have, like, there's these stone sculptures around here, and we haven't really ever talked, maybe I've talked about it, I know I've talked about it, I just don't know in what setting, don't remember. The stone sculpture in India emerged as an elaboration of this shamanic tradition of having a spirit power that rather than keeping it on your body, you requested and compelled it to stay on a stone. And then you would go to the stone and invoke that spirit power to do some work. And over time, the going to the stone became more and more and more elaborated, and especially as fewer and fewer people actually had that spirit power, and more people were pretending. You know, what happened was that stone sculpture and stone temples became, you know, came into existence and became increasingly elaborate. An example of that situation might be that in Kathmandu Valley, on the southern end of the valley, out by Parping, there's a Dakshin Kali temple. And this Dakshin Kali temple is in a valley, and there's a creek that runs through there, thank God, because on Tuesdays and Saturdays, the blood of all the animals that they sacrifice would, like, attract endless, it'd be a swarm of insects if it wasn't for the fact that there's water there they can use to clean the place. This temple is, you know, architecturally and sculpturally elaborate, but behind that temple, up on top of the ridge, there is this very ancient place that almost nobody used to go to, that may have changed, almost nobody went up there. And there was a stone there that had two brass eyes, or bronze eyes, hammered into it with a steel spike, and kumkum on the stone. But it was that stone that was the place of the spirit power, which, the worshipers of this goddess used to go to reactivate their own connection with the goddess and the connection with that spirit power. It was called Kali Mata, was the name of it. But there were these all over, hidden away all over Kathmandu Valley as these stone, and it used to be that this kind of power was much more prevalent. I mean, even in our lifetime, there were powerful sadhus who had magical capacity in India that I knew a few of them. Sure, anybody who spent any time in India encountered one, because it wasn't uncommon. I should say it wasn't rare. So, when he's talking here about a great pillar of smearing stone, what he's talking about is smearing blood on a stone. Because once a year, all the vihars and agam houses go to their stone and sacrifice an animal, which when they cut the throat of the animal, they spray the blood all over the place on the stone and they smear it. And why do they do that? Because what is the most life-giving substance that there is? Blood. And so their blood, they're offering this sacrifice that is meant to reinvigorate the life of that spirit power. They are offering that with the hope of getting the benefit of the creative capacity of that power. Here he is saying that our devotion expressed from within our own hearts is, akin to the great smearing stone. We are offering the very essence of our own life into life itself for the sake of the opportunity to endure in total union with the ultimate reality and to experience the creative capacity of that ultimate reality in our lives. So here he's talking, he has just fused the practices of ancient and shamanic people, and we don't know how old those traditions are. They could literally be hundreds of thousands of years old. Just in the last 48 hours, there was an article that came out about archaeologists discovering in the Sudan a wooden structure which is 476,000 years old, which was created by humans, which were our ancestors. And, 476,000 goes back beyond Neanderthal, Denisovans, and Cro-Magnon, etc. That's people. Well, what it's really telling us is that human-like intelligence, human-like ingenuity is much older than we imagine. Much older. And how fantastic is that? It's very hopeful. And here we are looking at the end of the world and the Tandava, and as ding-dong humans, we're still hopeful. It's like, I'm hopeful. I may not sound it, but I remain hopeful. I look in the mirror and I think I'm 75. I've got nothing to be hopeful about, but I am hopeful. At least I am blissful, and in that bliss, there is a kind of hope that endures you know, a hope for all of you and the whole world that, some nourishment, some beauty, some, relief from the relentless disappointment of living is available to us to sit in. When the itch for devotion flares up, worship comes into being as the great pillar of stone smearing. And so that's also talking about the Sri Chakra Puja at the very basic level. That's the Sri Chakra Puja becomes the foundational pillar of our worship, which is, that process by which we are reinvigorating ourselves. It can be as simple as remembering the mantra, or as simple as remembering, the form of the Sri Chakra, not even looking on it, just remembering it. It can be as simple as remembering the mantra, or even a part of the mantra. It doesn't have to be elaborate at all, or it can be extremely elaborate. However it is that our worship, activates our devotion, grounds it, and allows us to unfold it, that is foundational to the acquisition of the power of transformation that releases us from suffering and limitation. Glory to the Master whose recreation is an act of creation. Hallelujah. Amen. Glory, glory. Who delights in preservation and who rests contently, satisfied with the meal of the three worlds. Here he is referring to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva and the divine process, the cosmic process. Creation as recreation. Isn't that fantastic? Not creation as desperation, not creation as hysteria, not creation as denial, creation as recreation. Would that we can all be nourished enough that our creation is recreation and our recreation is creation. Don't you think? Isn't that, like, for me, that's the ultimate thing. When, we are having fun and creating at the same time, and it's not out of stress, not out of need, not out of any external pressure, but rather the upwelling of, and spontaneous expression of our own joy. Who rests contently satisfied with the meal of the three worlds. As we move into the final phase of our life, let our meal, let our nourishment that has been the form of our experience of the three worlds be digested within ourselves and provide us with contentment. That is the ultimate reality of Shiva. Shiva is not who recreates creatively. Well, he is really, but that's the job of Brahma is given in the Hindu mythology. Delights in preservation is Vishnu, but rests contentedly satisfied with the meal of the three worlds is Shiva. I bow to them who, going nowhere, renouncing nothing, yet view all this as your glorious abode. renunciates we know all about. I mean, we know about that whole program. And the going nowhere is renunciates, for the most part, are supposed to wander, right? Like the Jains, and have a rule that nobody will stay in, none of the Jain renunciates, and their renunciation is extreme. None of them will stay in the same place 3 days, longer than 3 days. It's not how it really happens, but that's what the rule is. And that's also true of many of like the Tirtha sadhus, the Tirtha Swamis. There's a tradition. Tirtha means the forest-dwelling Swamis. Like my line of Swamis is the Saraswatis. We're academics. We're supposed to study our whole lives and be learned. But there are forest-dwelling Tirtha Swamis, and there are mountain-dwelling Giri Swamis, and there's 10 different lines. I don't think there's any swamp-dwelling Swamis, but I'm not sure. But I am sure there are plenty of Swamis in the swamp. In any case, going nowhere, renouncing nothing, refers to the totality of seekers who have identified themselves as such. And so we bow to them who basically are the householders, the ordinary people who live in the ordinary world, who view all of this ordinary life that they have as the glorious abode of the ultimate reality. So here, for all of you who have imagined that, you should have been a Swami and you're not, or you should have been a monk and you're not, or you should have been something that you're not, he is very explicitly saying, view this whole world, as one shining demonstration of pure living awareness, and you're everywhere and always at once. And there is nothing that you need to be that is different than you. What else remains to be desired by those rolling in the wealth of devotion? For those deprived of it, what else is worthy of desire? Devotion. The overflowing of joy and abundance and beauty from within yourself, saturating your heart and dissolving your mind, and washing away all of the constraints that basically define us as in our human lives. What else remains to be desired by those rolling in the wealth of devotion? And for those who are deprived of it, what else is to be desired? I mean, in fact, all the things that they desire, all the things that people desire, are really their attempt to, in some way or another, connect to something of value in this world. And unfortunately, it's a failed attempt, because anything that is attained in the absence of devotion is just going to dry up and blow away. Anything attained in the absence of devotion isn't really worth having. And this is really the message of all of the renunciation and the yatra. The message in the renunciation and in the relentless yatra, is that devotion is the only thing worth stabilizing oneself in. And without that, nothing that you stabilize yourself in is worth being in. Where even agonies transform into pleasure and poison into nectar, where the world itself becomes liberation, this is the path of Shankara. When all the paradoxes get folded into an experience, into, it's not even exactly, it is an experience, but in a very deep, subtle way. When all of the paradoxes become, fused in our recognition of the ultimate non-duality, agony becomes pleasure. The boundary between pleasure and pain is dissolved, and the boundary between poison and nectar is dissolved, and everything becomes the bliss of livingness that is our one true experience. What we're truly experiencing is livingness, and everything else is, the distraction that we encounter because of the vibrancy and the movement of livingness that is our essence. In the beginning, the middle, or the final stages, there is no pain for your devotee. Well, O Lord, still we are suffering. What is this? Tell me. Hell yes. What is it? It's like life in general. It's like we're relieved about, the transition from one pain to the next. In that space of transition between one pain and the next, when there is a little bit of space to breathe. And yet there is always another pain. And if there isn't a pain staring us in the face, then we start thinking about the pain that we just had, or that we had a while ago, which drags us right back down into the same rabbit hole again. There is no coulda, woulda, shoulda, unfortunately, even though we like to think about it. In the beginning, the middle, or the final stages, there is no pain for your devotees, O Lord. Still we are suffering. What is this? The pain of our, that is in our bodies, in contrast to the conviction that we hold in our hearts and the choice that we have made to remain focused on that conviction. That is the dimension in which there is no suffering. And yet, O Lord, some seek your realization through knowledge, through yoga, or through other disciplines. But this realization shines forth constantly only to the self-willed devotees. Only to those of us who have made that choice and who have the capacity to hold that choice. This choice is not a choice based on belief, because, I believe this chair is solid underneath me. And yet, when we look very carefully, we understand that it's not solid at all. It is a choice based on experience that gives rise to conviction. This realization shines forth constantly only to the self-willed devotees, people who are practicing devotion. Devotion that is, the upwelling and the overflowing of gratitude in our own hearts. There is no plaintiveness for devotees, nor any worry, for their own self is identical to you. Even then, in the external state, indescribable word, "O Shiva," is on their lips. Definitely the indescribable word, "O Shiva," is on my lips. O Lord, I praise your Kriya Shakti, your power of action. It's Kriya Shakti. Light of all lights, filled with universal consciousness as I am all this. Kriya Shakti. I am all of this. But all of this, is sort of the refraction of the light of the activity of respiratory process. All of this that, when we think I am all of this and we look out and we say I am all of this, it is true that we are all of this. And this is all us. And there are many layers to that discussion, but the bottom line in all of it is that, in fact, all we are is this simple vibrancy. I mean, we could talk about it as respiration, and that's one frequency, but even the subtlest vibration that exists, let's say a vibration that exists at Planck length, which is really, 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 really small, even that is a respiratory process, right? O Celestial One, all beings, including Brahma, Indra, Vishnu, view their objects as food. Therefore, I glorify the universe consisting only of you. How wonderful that, in our earliest days as students of Rudi's or students of the ashram, our community, our practice, we understand that experience is energy, that the world is food, that we are taking in this experience as nourishment that we can grow. And we're trained in a process of taking in this energy as nourishment and circulating it in our system to allow ourselves to digest and become ever more increasingly that nourishment. How great is that? We're blessed. I mean, and for the most part, most of the people who've ever encountered it just totally don't get it. But we are blessed. Because being and non-being are relative, everything apart from me is unreal. This alone is the significance of your play of dissolution. We did talk about that already. We just don't know. We don't know what in this realm of sensory experience. We don't know what data our senses are giving us, what pictures our minds are providing us, are even slightly real. We have no idea. We have no capacity even to judge, because our mind is so good at making up shit. We have no idea. So its dissolution is a big doorway into profound truth. By mere recognition, O granter of boons, does your transcendental form emerge. And that's a way of saying when we start contemplating, we start seeing. Does your transcendental form emerge before the rolling in wealth of devotion, and thus they conquer all causes of pain. The wealth of devotion allows us to conquer the causes of pain. I have talked to you already, we've discussed that this morning, but let's say it again, that the engaging in the simple bliss of devotion dissolves tensions and allows our creative energy to flow. And in that flowing, there is healing, and there is joy, and there is ultimate understanding. And so, lingering in pain is inappropriate to those of us who are committed to devotion. We will experience pain, but we choose devotion. We choose, oh my God, we choose to be happy. Holy shit. How about that? As though saturated with the wine of the nectar of devotion, the vital organs radiating with delight, the adventurous ones dance through the night with Shiva's attendants, a party of ghosts. Now, if that isn't a reference to Chud right there, to a Karpalika form of Chud, or a Krama form of Chud, I don't know what is. That is it. But also, Chud is a fundamentally Shaiva practice because Shiva himself lives in the cremation ground. And it's Shiva himself that is offering his body in the form of sensory experience to all, hungry ghosts, which it turns out, the meaning of that term in all practicality is all two-legged creatures that are existing in this world are hungry ghosts. Let's not be. And it's only the recognition of the ultimate reality that liberates us from the status of hungry ghost. What makes us a hungry ghost is our ego clinging. Our ego clinging. This also is, of course, a reference to the Shaiva Kula Yaga. The Kula Yaga, which is, sort of an elaboration of the practice of Chud, the offering of our bodies. In this case, the whole Kula Yaga, the consuming of wine and meat, alcohol and meat and fish and pounded grain, and physical intimacy, the consuming of all of this in a wild and glorious dance with hungry ghosts. Only the adventurous can attend to, the courageous. But it's only the courageous who are willing to look beyond the boundaries of their own egos and see really and truly the reality of our existence. That requires courage, and that courage is only attained through the practice of devotion. Through devotion, we can rouse ourselves to have a vision of reality. Most people rouse themselves to a vision of their own desire. With the same devotional mood in which I began these hymns, may I, O Shambhu, grow ever more secure. I wish that for us all, because it is the pain of this experience of living that makes us relentlessly insecure. God bless Rudy and Nityananda, and God bless all of us. Look, if you read the physics, if you read the theoretical physics, they're questioning the reality of particles. Just because when we focus on something, when we bring our attention to something and we have an experience of it, whether it's visual or otherwise, we cannot count on the fact that what our mind is in, the image that our mind is presenting for us is what is we're actually looking at, because that's what our mind does. It condenses, huge amounts of data. It compresses huge amounts of data into information that we can tolerate. And if it didn't do that, maybe we couldn't tolerate it. And then maybe the whole process of endurance, which is what we have evolved to, would cease. Now, I don't know why that's a bad thing, but evidently, the life of the earth, the life that is the life of the earth, which we are expressions of, wants to keep doing it, and it doesn't want to stop. So here we are. The Gaia wishes to continue to express herself. So, but we don't know. There may not be particles. And there are increasing questions in physics about the reality of particles. And there's we've invested trillions in colliders. There's that collider in Geneva and in other places, these atom smashers, which now it turns out, what the information that they have received in that, as they examine it over and over and over again, suggests that the conclusions that they have come to about that circumstance already are completely wrong. Just like the conclusions about the size of the universe and its fundamental nature, are coming increasingly into question. The universe could be infinitely large. It could be, 28 billion years large, 28 billion light years large, or who knows? We just don't know. But all of the things, all of the assumptions that we had in science are turning out to be wrong, or at least completely inadequate. And there's another thing that we talked about at one point. We're focused on particles, and so as part of our focus on particles, we see the fundamental nature of our physical bodies and our metabolic processes as cells. But it turns out that view might be completely wrong. Let's say and one thing it is, if it's not wrong, is it's completely inadequate. And in fact, what we are is mostly fluid, not mostly cells, and that it is the fluid mechanisms, the flows that this body is comprised of, which are much more fundamental to it than the cells, which are effects of the flows. So, all the ways in which we conveniently have been conditioned to think of ourselves and our lives in this world, it turns out these concepts that we hold, these conditionings that we, are expressions of, are inadequate to our circumstance. And that's where the rub comes in between the technology that we live in and the ways in which we live in that technology, because all this information shows us increasingly that at the rate of flow of information and energy in the world today that we ourselves have provoked, our understanding of the world is inadequate, and our capacity to endure in this environment is also completely inadequate. So the environment that is expressed as heat, the environment that is expressed as information flows, as resource accessibility, yada, yada, all, human beings in this environment may not be compatible. But because life seems to want to continue to express herself, maybe something else is going to come up. Let's see.